Hi, my name is Gene Monterastelli, and the video you are about to watch is a recording from the 24 Hours of Tapping, which is an event that is held annually to support the Peaceful Heart Network. If you appreciate or learn anything from this video, the easiest way for you to say thank you is to support the work of the Peaceful Heart Network, who has worked with over 300,000 migrants, immigrants, prisoners, folks in disaster areas by bringing tapping to them. As you watch the video, across the bottom, you will see a link where you can support their amazing work. And I hope you enjoy this conversation. Dawson Church is an award-winning science writer with 3 best-selling books to his credit. The Genie in Your Genes was the first book to demonstrate the emotion-driven gene expression. Mind to Matter showed the brain creates much more of what we think as objective reality, and Bliss Brain demonstrated that peak mental states rapidly remodel the brain for happiness. Dawson's newest book, Spiritual Intelligence. Boy, you can't tell I've been up for 26 hours at this point. Dawson's new book, Spiritual Intelligence, was published in May 2025. Please welcome to the digital stage my friend Dawson Church. Questions that I love starting with, because we've been going back and forth to get ready for all of this. And I always love asking people, not what are you known for? What are you most excited about? And sometimes those are the same, and sometimes they're not, because we just have this wealth of amazing practitioners from around the world who do something professionally, but they also have a deeper things that they just love. And so when you brought the concept up of tapping for spiritual intellect, intelligence, and how we connect that, why is that something that's kind of at the front of your lived experience at this moment in history? Why are you excited about this?
What a fabulous question, too, because your lived experience is what you are most engaged with right now. And yes, you have your presentation, your career, what you've done well with in the past, and there's what's happening with you right now. And for me, when those two come together, there's usually a book at the end of it. And this book, Spiritual Intelligence, was many years in the making. And it is actually what I'm fascinated by now. Like when we were chatting earlier, as we were talking before we came live, I was actually, as you were sharing bits of your life, I was mentally translating that into which parts of your brain were active or inactive at that time. And so for me, seeing our experience through the lens of science is an absolutely unending source of fascination. And I ask myself when I see things, why are they this way? And science gives me the answer. So for me, what's always most interesting is what science says about things. And what science says now about our spiritual journey is so radical, it's going to literally reshape the whole course of neuroscience and medicine and psychology in the next while, because we're learning that as we use our minds, our brains are being reshaped dramatically. And in one randomized controlled trial I did, these were people who were meditating for a month, and we looked at their brain structure and function in large, high-resolution MRIs before the month, at the end of the month. In 30 days, in just 1 month of a deep meditation form, their brains changed dramatically. And so this is really the cutting edge of science. It's also the cutting edge of my interest. And then I want to explain to people how all this works and why it's important to you. Why is it important to change your brain? So I think that's what I'm interested in, not just academically, but in terms of personal growth, sharing with people how this information from science, like how radically your brain can shift and change its structure in a month, that is the really exciting thing to me.
And before we dive into the bits and pieces of that, I want to underline something inside of what you're talking about there. As a teenager in the 80s, and as well-meaning adults came in telling us that we shouldn't be drinking, one of the stories that they told us was, you have a limited number of brain cells. This is something that is static. And if you drink alcohol, you're killing brain cells. And the implication was, and then they never came back. And so in my lifetime, this idea of neuroplasticity and the fact that we can actually change and shape our brain is something that for you and I who do this sort of work every single day, we see the consequences of that. But I think culturally it's important for us to underline the fact that, we're dealing with something here that is shapeable, that is transformable. And because that's the case, like, it's hopeful because I'm not stuck with something that is going on inside of me, because it's something that we get to change. And so I'd like, just even before we dive into kind of the nuts and bolts of that, I just want to emphasize that to remind folks that this is, not only is this new and exciting, but it's really a really useful thing for us to be engaging with.
Absolutely. And we are astonished as we look at the newest research at how quickly the brain changes. And I have a wonderful image in one of my books of two neurons firing as seen under a scanning electron microscope. And as they fire, they're shaking a little bit as their synapses are connecting with each other and communicating with each other. They move closer together, and then they eventually touch and they wire together. And then I have people look at the timestamp on that little video. 12 seconds. 12 seconds from firing to wiring. And when you think that every 12 seconds you are wiring multiple connections in your brain, you realize that you have a powerful instrument for change. Because if you change, for example, from having habits like anger and annoyance and irritation and overwhelm, and you cultivate the gifts of spiritual intelligence in your life, and you are focused now on meditating, on following your breath, on being patient, being kind, being compassionate, those aren't just abstract virtues. Those are literally new connections you're making in your brain. I remember in 2009, Gene, I realized I needed to work on compassion. I realized I was a moderately compassionate person and not a highly compassionate person as a result of a lot of childhood trauma that I hadn't quite fully worked with yet. And so I began to work intensively on compassion. I realize now that even though I thought it was a spiritual exercise, what I was really doing was I was building neural capacity. And I focused intensely for many, many months in meditation, in practice, in the way I listen to other people, on developing my compassion for them. And it worked. It was amazing. After that period of time, I found myself becoming a genuinely compassionate person. And then something totally unforeseen happened, which was one day I was doing something and I made a big mistake in my life, and I was full of self-criticism and blame toward me. And suddenly compassion kicked in for me. So I found that compassion for others translated into self-compassion. So we do build these brain circuits, and you certainly want to make sure you are building the circuits of love, connection, awe, grace, gratitude. Build those circuits. They become bigger. And how much bigger? In one study, 10% bigger for certain circuits in a couple of months. So you're building some of these capacities very, very quickly. And then the ones you aren't using, that anger circuit, that blame, that shame, that resentment circuit, after only 3 weeks, that starts to disintegrate. So you literally are remodeling your brain with every single thought.
And as you say that, one of the words that you used in that answer was the word virtue. And as you said that, I immediately went back to Philosophy 101 in university, and how the ancient Greeks talked about a virtue as nothing more than a habit of doing and living the right way. It was, and it's so interesting, they recognize it as this habit where it wasn't, I'm making this conscious choice to, like in your case, be compassionate, but instead it was, how do we cultivate to the place that compassion, the virtue of compassion, is my habitual response to what is going on. And, it's amazing. 2,500 years later, we're now in a circumstance where that gut instinct they had, you're now in a circumstance where you're actually seeing it under electron microscopes and functional MRIs. We're actually seeing that transformation happen for that thing that they just recognized as part of the human experience.
And so much of science is showing us, validating that these ancient ideas, these ancient concepts, ancient philosophies are actually incredibly potent tools for shifting our physiology. One, for example, set of studies for which the discoverers won the Nobel Prize was the discovery that certain deep forms of meditation literally are triggering the growth of telomeres, which are our anti-aging molecules. And we can measure the length of telomeres and make predictions about lifespan. It's a very reliable way of measuring lifespan, because our telomeres, these are the end caps, like the end of a zipper, the little little device that stops a zipper from unzipping totally, those are the telomeres on the ends of our chromosomes, and they shorten by about 1% a year. And when they get too short, the cell dies. We're finding in meditation, certain kinds of meditation actually lengthen the telomeres. And we're finding now that these ancient virtues, these people who were advocating for these virtues 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, they actually were advocating for what we now recognize is key to health and longevity: longer telomeres, much more beneficial gene expression. In one EFT study, people tapping for an hour with a seasoned clinical EFT practitioner, they had beneficial, significant changes to the genes that suppress prostate cancer, breast cancer, throat cancer, colorectal cancer, damage to the skin from the sun's ultraviolet rays. They found that the genes that code for the more efficient neural signaling in the memory and learning centers of our brains were being enhanced. And again, that was from 1 hour of tapping. So we're now realizing that these ancient techniques, I mean, acupuncture has been around for thousands of years. And we're now realizing that these seemingly very abstract concepts like be kind, love your neighbor, the golden rule, take care of your body, breathe, be in your body, be mindful. We're discovering these are absolutely radically potent health and well-being and longevity interventions. So that's the exciting thing. That's why I find science so absolutely absorbing.
And for folks who are watching along with this, you're going to see how this conversation goes hand in hand with the conversation I have with David Feinstein about the mechanism of tapping and what is actually going on inside of the brain. So these are really great complementary conversations. So then, high level, great. We know this is the case. How then, other than I'm tapping regularly, therefore it is good for me, how do we, in a structured way, now that we're recognizing this cause and effect that is happening inside of us, I do this in a particular way, this is the benefit that comes from that. How do we then think practically in bringing that into our daily lives? Not where you're giving me like 37 hours of homework every single day, but like how, like what is it like? How does what you're encountering with this research and these studies and what we're learning, how does that interface with the daily life of someone who is watching and tapping along with us here?
There are several things that are so beneficial. I think they are essential to a wonderful life. And without them, it's very hard to have one. And the first of these, in my book, Spiritual Intelligence, I outline the 4 circuits in the brain that we've discovered are highly active in spiritually intelligent people. And the first of those 4 circuits I emphasize working on is the emotion regulation network. And we have this whole network, this whole circuit in our brains that has to do with regulating emotion. And I remember sitting in a cafe with a longtime meditator in Paris a few years back, and it was a wonderful setting. I was there, my wife was there, this wonderful friend of ours was there. We were enjoying a French meal, and a waiter dropped a huge tray of dishes, cups, glasses, silverware, stumbled, dropped this on the concrete floor. And it sounded like a bomb going off. And it was so interesting. The 3 of us meditators are sitting there. We look over and notice the problem, realize that it'll soon get cleaned up, and keep on going with our conversation. But some people in the cafe were screaming. I was like, oh my God, I'll be under attack. I mean, they were having these massive startle responses. So after a while, you learn to regulate your emotion, and you're much better able. Now, if it had been a real bomb going off or a real problem, we would have taken rapid evasive action because we were calm. The people who are running around like chickens with their heads cut off, they aren't able to take effective action. So regulating your emotions is incredibly useful to you. And one of the benefits from developing emotion regulation is that as you learn the skill, it's also not just a skill, it's also a certain piece of hardware in your brain called the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. It runs from your right behind your eyebrows over here, runs from your prefrontal cortex all the way back into your limbic system, your emotional brain. And it literally, I mean, we hear the tray dropping, but we feel the emotion and then very rapidly, in just a nanosecond, dial it all down. So we don't have that big startle response. That makes a huge difference, because now it's not just that you aren't reactive to the cups and saucers being dropped. You aren't reactive to your teammates saying an annoying thing. You aren't reactive to getting your request from the government in your mail to produce your tax returns. You aren't reactive to bad drivers on the road or the subway car being too full. You aren't reactive to anything, even the stuff going on in your own body. So we find that meditators develop a lot of tissue in this part of the brain called the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. It's like the control knob for negative emotion, and you still feel those feelings. I mean, you still feel all the normal human emotions, but you can dial them down very quickly. With that comes another very unexpected side benefit, which is that that knob actually has a function that goes in the opposite direction, and you can dial up positive emotion. So we have people both dial down negative emotion and dial up positive emotion. So as you learn these skills, and tapping is really great to release that negative emotion. So you release the negative emotion, you build up your ventromedial prefrontal cortex, it becomes big and strong. You then have emotion regulation, and that is an incredibly valuable life skill. If you learn nothing other than that one thing, just regulate your emotion, your life will already be much better, because you aren't reacting to your parent getting Alzheimer's and your kid acting out in school and your body getting sick and all the other stuff going on in the world. So emotion regulation is one of those really useful tools that comes from these personal growth practices. And it's not just a nice abstract behavior, it's literal tissue in your brain that gets bigger when you are following these practices of spiritual intelligence. So there are many, many other useful ways, but just one that is foundational to happiness is that ability to have a tool in tapping, in meditation, to regulate your emotions.
The way that I like describing that to my students and my clients is, the goal is a proportionate, well-informed emotional response. I understand when Gary Craig presented his version of tapping to the world that he called it emotional freedom technique, because that is a post-transformational feeling when I'm free of this negative emotion. But like you said, the goal is not for us to be emotionless. Like that's where the juiciness of life is. That is where how our guidance internally, we're getting information about how do we not only stay, like, it impacts every part of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, from how do we get safe to how do we enjoy richness and purpose and all of that sort of stuff. And it's, again, proportionate and well informed. Like, it's great that I'm afraid of tigers. If I never left my apartment in Brooklyn because there's one in the Central Park Zoo, disproportionate. And so giving ourselves a chance, or I walk into my living room, my kitchen, behind this door here, and there's a mouse in there, and I jump on the table and I scream like a 5-year-old. That's misinformed. And so what you're talking about is dialing our emotional response into a place where, I one time had a similar experience where something had happened in a restaurant and I didn't react. I looked at it and I returned to what was going on. And the people I was sitting with thought I was like emotionless. Like, why aren't you reacting to that? I'm like, because it doesn't impact me in any way. I can't clean it up. They won't let me touch the broken glass. It didn't impact me. I'm just here and where we are. And so it's almost like when we act in this way around people who are not, it's easy for them to see us as the odd one, not the other way around in those particular settings, because it's so natural, or natural is not the right word. It's so normative for us to be at this disproportionate emotional response as we're navigating the day in the world.
What's really interesting is to look at the research into Tibetan monks, which I talk about in chapter 4 of Spiritual Intelligence, and what happens to their emotions. And what we find is, so something bad happens, and they do have that normal emotional response, but they can dial it down using that emotional regulation circuit very quickly. And so paradoxically, the way these experiments are set up usually is that the monk is sitting in a chair hooked up to an EEG. The scientists are measuring his or her brain waves, and then in a adjoining room in the lab that the monk cannot see, the researchers play a recording of a child screaming in pain. Now, this is a sound that every human being just freaks out when they hear a child screaming in pain. And so they look at what goes on in the brains of these monks. And what they find is that the monks appear calm. The monks appear not to have a reaction. But what's actually shown on their brainwave scans is that they are actually having more of an emotional reaction, a bigger reaction than the average Tom, Dick, or Harry. They actually have a big spike, which immediately shifts into the parts of the brain that govern activity. So it shifts from high emotion, compassion, to activity. They are thinking about, how can I help? And that change happens in a nanosecond. So you might look like Mr. Spock, the child crying, and you aren't giving any reaction outwardly. What's happened is you've had this big spike of compassion for that other human being, and immediately blood flow in the brain and brain activity shifts into that task network in the brain, and they focus on, how can I help? That's why we see monks and nuns in poor parts of the world. They are caring for the children, the elderly. They're running the hospitals, they're running the schools. They are highly focused on how can I help? And so it's really interesting to look what goes on in the brain during these kinds of activities. You do not lose your ability for feeling things. You actually feel the pain of the world more acutely, and yet you're able to move rapidly into, how can I help? Right now, our How Can I Help at EFT Universe is focused in a number of places. One of those is Ukraine. We're working with a big institution called Ukraine Institute of Trauma Therapy. They're keen on bringing EFT into Ukraine. We're helping them build classes to train their 100 or so staff members. We're working on a protocol they can use with traumatized children, traumatized adults, people who are fighting, and also civilians. And so, again, am I outraged at Ukraine and what's going on there and the invasion of Ukraine? I'm as outraged as the next person. If those EEG studies to be relieved, I believe I'm more outraged than the average person. But it shifted straight away into this fairly major project that EFT Universe is doing to, how can we help? What can we do in a concrete way to bring help to those people? So you funnel your emotion then into useful tasks to do, again, rather than running around the restaurant saying, we're all going to die.
And one thing I want to highlight inside of that, like, you're talking about what you're doing, the fact that we are in the 4th year of this particular partnership with the Peaceful Heart Network came directly from me experiencing a sense of outrage of how migrants were being treated in Qatar during the building of stadiums in the World Cup. Great that we have these big things going on. I also want to highlight inside of that is that the way we take action and the way we make a difference does not have to be systematic. It does not have to be grand. It can be ways that are in the place that we are in the moment. I can remember years ago, I was at a language and a flamenco school in the south of Spain. And first day at the end of dance class, I was like, drinks. We're like, drinks. We all head to this bar and we're having tapas and we're on these tables. And one of the women who was with us didn't expect to be there. Like, she came at the last minute, came with a friend, didn't speak any Spanish. And I look over, and on the top of the bar top, she is taking all of the breadcrumbs on the table and she's putting them into a neat little pile. And I just turned to her and I go, let me guess, that's the only thing in the universe you control right now. And she went, yeah. And she wasn't offended by that. And she just went right back to her little pile, like without even realizing it as a protection mechanism. She was in an over-aroused emotional state for all of these things she did not control. An unexpected trip, living with strangers, over her head competency with dance and language. And so the way she moved to that was she moved to an action. Now, piling crumbs on the top of the table maybe not be the most productive action in the world, but you can see how the brain is naturally disposed towards going, one of the ways we respond to our emotions is going, great, how can I engage with this so I'm back in a place of control? And from what it sounds like, if we're consistently doing the work of getting healthier, clearing the past traumas, heightening and transforming the parts of the brain that's going on, it happens quicker, it happens easier, and it probably happens in a way that is more productive, where I'm not just doing something, but I'm heading towards responding to what is going on in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so interesting to look at that from the lens of how our brains are working. And you're right, that was the one thing she could control, she could do. And again, doing that little task was able to shift her focus away from the emotion into something useful, which is a soothing activity. So what can you do? How does that work in your life? And some little task is going to present itself, and it isn't necessarily launching a huge big initiative for the relief of some population, like suffering people in a country. It might be as simple as going and smiling at your neighbor. One of the most powerful things, there's a study published in the last few days actually showing that what we think of as small talk, just sitting around shooting the breeze, talking to people, has powerful social effects and calming ones on our nervous system. So that small thing you do, that small smile you give somebody, like when you're buying something at a store, look into the eyes of the person you're interacting with, smile at them. If you ask how their day was, don't just say, "How was your day?" Really ask with interest how their day was. And so what you find is there are people all over the world who are doing this. And I love sometimes watching people in a store, and they're stocking the shelves, or they're cutting up the groceries, the vegetables for customers, and yet they're interacting, and they are these bright beings of connection. And that social connection is so important. So your task needn't necessarily be anything grand, as you're saying. Simply connecting with other people is not only powerful social glue, it's also powerful for you and for your well-being. So take that small step of kindness. I had a New Year's resolution a few years ago, which I will confess, implemented imperfectly, that I'm better at it than I was before. And my resolution was simply to, when I feel appreciation, to express it. Because often I think that I noticed somebody doing doing a good job, doing something that was meaningful and appreciated, and I would just think, "Oh, that's great." Now I walk up to that person, like, there was a big. I was at a concert a few months ago, and there was a fairly major star who was performing there, and during the intermission, I walked past the stage, and he happened to be picking up his guitar. So I thought, gee, I'm really feeling nervous about talking to this guy, but I'll talk to him. And I just talked to him and expressed my appreciation. And so getting over yourself, getting over your own hesitation, reaching out and just saying thank you. Thank you for the service you just gave me. Thank you for noticing that. I so appreciate that. Today, this morning, I had somebody who was doing a little project for me, and she fixed something very promptly on one of my websites. And I just wrote her a little note of thanks. Could I have just gone on with my day? Yes. But did I take the time to do that? I did. So again, think of the small things you can do just to make the world a better place. If everyone was doing that, the world would very quickly become a better place, and the effects would ripple out. Happiness research shows that when you are happier, when you have an improved, more positive mood, you affect people around you. That your neighbor is 34% more likely to be happy. Her neighbor is about 11% happier as a result, and her neighbor, who you don't even know, is about 6% more happy. So your happiness is radiating out from you. Your small act of gratitude, appreciation, praise, kindness is rippling out from you. So let's be those people.
So as you say that, I'm actually right now in the middle of a 100-day challenge in which I am writing a handwritten thank you note every single day for 100 days. I did this a number of years ago. I got out of the habit. I'm back into it again. And for those of you out there who are like freaked out by Dawson saying small talk, there's an absolutely amazing book called The Art of Small Talk by Casey Wilson and Jessica St. Clair. It talks about a lot of the stuff you're talking about, the value of it, giving the research behind it, but they actually teach you how to do small talk in a way that is useful. I understand how scary it is. It can be. again, saying thank you to someone you admire in a setting like that, where you think they have other things to do. It's an absolutely fabulous book, The Art of Small Talk. It will coach you to help you to do it in a better way. And like Dawson just said, it's not just about the person you're talking to. We get an opportunity to impact people 2 and 3 levels away who we will never meet, because we're just making everybody's day a little bit brighter. And, again, like, our buddy Rick Wilkes, he uses the vocabulary vibrational leadership. And the way that we show up energetically in that way impacts the people around us. I mean, I can remember as a child, a motivational speaker speaking to us saying, because they're always like, you got to be careful of peer pressure. You got to be careful of peer pressure. He's like, you're peer pressure. You get to be peer pressure, and not to force people to do stuff. But in the way that we move through the world, we are creating safety for someone else to act kindly. We're demonstrating that we can, like we're giving some, like one of, I say this half in jest and half not. One of my great gifts to the world is I'm the person who's willing to go through the buffet line first, so nobody else is uncomfortable having to break that seal at the party. Like, once someone's eating, everybody else can eat, and we're okay in that particular way. But like, to recognize, like, the small things are significant if we make someone else's day better and brighter. It doesn't have to be grand to be significant. It doesn't have to be massive to be transformative. And so it's just great for us to recognize how simple it can be as we're humans in the world.
Absolutely. I remember being the CEO of a big publishing company in the 1990s, and had a lot of meetings. And this is before there was much in the way of email or voicemail. Meetings were in person, and I had a lot of meetings every month. And when I would walk into a meeting, I would usually just start by chatting with somebody, complimenting somebody, commenting on something they were wearing, or finding some way of establishing personal connection with them. And that is like the carrier wave. That is the vibration of kindness. That's the vibration of connection. So they were coming into the meeting expecting we'd be talking about the contract. So now everyone has their positions on the contract. I want this, I want that, I want you not to do this. And so the atmosphere tends to begin really, really, and often adversarial and often very tense. And then you just say, wow, what's that pin you're wearing on your lapel? And they say, oh, that's because my Rotary Club has sponsored this foreign student from Morocco, blah, 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 blah. And then everyone else, you can just feel the vibration in the room shift. When we did that, suddenly we were all human beings problem solving together. It was a very, very powerful difference to make. And so that concept of vibrational leadership is something you can do. You are a vibrational leader. You are putting out a vibration. You're putting out energy. We call this whole field of tapping as part of energy psychology. And your energy is incredibly important. My New Year's resolution this last year, Gene, by the way, which I actually am doing pretty well with keeping, is I had several really difficult, intractable problems in my business. And so I had a lot of things that were easy and going well, and a few things that were just, some of them were like 10-year-long problems. And so I said to myself, I am going to treat every problem as though it were an energy problem. Regardless of how much material problem it is, it might look like a purely material problem. I'm going to treat it as an energy problem, and I'm going to focus on the energy of it. So every single problem, I began to focus on the energy and the vibrational shift that I could bring by the way I held that in the energy field. And right away, the very first part of the year, 2 of those problems, when I shifted, they were like, one was a 5-year-old problem, one was a 10-year-old problem. 2 of those problems, they changed within weeks of seeing them as energy and tapping on them and shifting the vibration around them. So I challenge you as well. It may seem like a purely physical thing. Just treat it as an energy thing and see what kind of shift that produces in your consciousness. And then it may change in material reality. If it doesn't, you've changed your whole inner ecology around it.
The way I do that is, and I literally have a little sticker on my mug that reminds me of it, that literally says, first action, best action. Like, what is the first action I can take before I try and take the actual action? And we already do this naturally. Like, I'm going to do something difficult at my computer. I go, I'm going to have a difficult conversation. I think about that stuff that is through. But what you're doing is you're saying, okay, great. What is the stuff that I do inside of me that I control before I'm actually physically moving in the world and engaging in that particular way? And like, for me, Like by treating it as an energetic problem, for me, the way I think about it is I treat it as a resource state problem, which is my energy. If I am able to transfer my resource state, all of a sudden I see problems more clearly. I see solutions more clearly. I'm able to recognize
Yeah.
proportionately what is a big deal and what is not a big deal. So I have a feeling that as you are engaging with these complicated problems in your business, part of it was paring down to, oh, this is actually the heart of the matter. And this other stuff that I'm worrying about or I'm bumping in or I'm trying to solve isn't actually critical to what's going on, and giving ourselves a chance to reset as we step into that. Just so, so valuable inside of the way we move through the world.
Certainly is. Yeah, it just changes the whole energy of the problem, changes the whole state inside of you. And then when your emotional temperature goes down, then you become more resourceful. And there is a whole section in my book, Spiritual Intelligence, on this, looking at high creatives, the people who have the Edison light bulb moments, the people who have the aha moments that change everything in their lives, in their career, in their families, in the world. And they have a very interesting way of functioning in their brain. It's called binding. That's what you'll read about if you read the studies about this. It's called binding. It's a weird name, but what it means is that if you can just picture your brain as having all of these regions and networks, and then there are neural pathways that are connecting them all. High creatives have a lot of those connecting pathways, and they can put together ideas and concepts from many different parts of the brain. People who don't have this, people who have inflexibility of decision making, for them it's either white or black. It's either this way or that way. They see two options or three options, and that's it. People who are high creatives, they see many, many, many options. And what often stops us from seeing those many options in our lives is stress. When you're stressed, your field of vision literally narrows. When Marine pilots learn this, when I had one Marine pilot who I was tapping with, and he was taking off from the deck of an aircraft carrier, his very first solo flight. So he's been through the whole Marine Corps training to fly jets with an instructor, and now it's his first solo flight. And he begins his takeoff run. He starts taking off. He sees a glow behind him, and the engine's on fire. And so he had to take off and then turn around and bail out. And he describes what happened. He said that his field of vision narrowed from this broad situational awareness to the pinpoint of space in front of him. Our eyes literally do that when we are stressed. And what Marine training includes is the ability to breathe and reverse that and be able to see the whole picture or a bigger picture. It's called situational awareness, rather than just focus in on one small thing. When people are frightened, they're staring at the tiger and they're completely unaware of everything else going around them. So you want to have that sort of flexibility in your thinking where you see 1,000 possibilities. If you think that's an either or, you just have gotten trapped in stress. Stress has fooled you into thinking you have limited choices. You always have far more choices than you realize, and you get that by reducing your stress. How to reduce your stress? You tap, you meditate, you fill your life with various stress reduction techniques, and you lower your stress level. Then you become far more cognitively flexible and able to meet the challenges of your life. So this is a very practical life skill, and it pays off enormously. You then can find which of those pathways is going to be the best one for you.
I've been by kind of like my decompressing at the end of the day recently, as I've been watching this silly British game show. It's not really a game show. It's called Taskmaster. And they have 5 comedians over the course of a season. And basically they're having to do all of this lateral thinking to solve problems. And they're getting to be creative. And because they're naturally funny, it's a very, very funny show. But it's really fun watching them solve problems. But you can see, and oftentimes with the problems, there are answers written on the wall. Like literally they're giving them obvious clues of what's going on. And the moment they hear time starts now, you can literally see what you're talking about, where they just go zoom, and they're literally looking at what's on the table in front of them. And the answer is literally in letters this big on the wall that they can no longer see because the stress of time starts now. And even for things that aren't time challenges, just hearing time starts now immediately makes us go, oh, I figured this out right now because there's a clock that is ticking. And giving ourselves permission to liberate ourselves from the stress of the moment, like all of a sudden we literally see more, and when we see more, we have more opportunities, we make better choices, we engage with all of that stuff. And so again, I think it's just useful for all of us as we're thinking about this. Like it is great that I'm in a circumstance that I have access to a tool, working with a skilled practitioner, that I can find really complex trauma from my past and I can clear that and I can heal that. But it is not the only application of these amazing tools that we have. One of the big shifts that's happened in my life is I no longer think of tapping as an approach. I think of it as a tool. And inside of the tapping tool, I can use it as an emotional first aid, or clearing a resistance, or healing a past, or something like that. And so often when we think about this super awesome tool, we're thinking about the really big, complicated things that it does. And by what you're talking about here, having a regular practice of tapping and releasing stress, adding a meditative practice that is reducing my stress, it's going to show up in these rippling ways in everything that we're doing, which means that I make better choices, which means that I'm less likely to have an emotional response for when I made a bad choice. Like, not only am I reducing what I'm experiencing right now by being more thoughtful, being more deliberate, being more present, I'm less likely to step in bear traps. I'm less likely to wander off of the path. And that makes everything easier as well. By avoiding a problem, I don't have to solve a problem. And so like this idea of just like starting at that really, really simple place of spending time, reducing stress, making myself more flexible in the moment emotionally, just solves so many problems around us, because almost, most of the bad choices in my life, the resource state I was in was an impact on that particular point choice. Not the only thing that was there, but it certainly was a contributing factor to what was going on as we were doing that, whatever I was doing at the time.
And it'll make you more stressed, and you'll make more poor choices. And so
Yeah.
then you have the whole string of them behind them. And so I want to challenge those who are sharing in this conversation with Gene and I. As you're listening, I want you to really focus on not just the big stresses. So when Gene says stress, you're maybe thinking of the major stressors, losing your job, or the economy going bad, or losing your marriage, or the death of a loved one, or a terrible disease, or something major going on. I want you to take Gene's words to heart and think about the minor stresses in your life. How can I lower the stress burden on my body, on my mind? How can I liberate the kind of thinking that Gene is describing here, and do it every day, and do it as part of a practice every day? So minor stress is not harmless. In one study of 68,000 adults published in the British Medical Journal, they found that mild anxiety, a little bit of stress, had an association with about a 20% greater risk of death over the 8-year period of the study. So major effects on our bodies as a result of even minor stress. It was a shocking study. We knew that major emotional turmoil really impacts the body and causes early death. We had no idea that minor levels of stress did that. So I want you to focus on minor stresses as well. Maybe big things that are worrying you. Focus on that tension in your body. Where is tension being held in your body, and how can I release it? When I'm talking to my child, my wife, my team member, the other people in my community, where am I getting stressed? How can I tap? How can I release that? And make this a practice. Every single day, I tap myself every day. I also tap mentally sometimes. I'm in a situation where I can't tap physically. So we'll just do some mental tapping, and that'll help me lower that stress level again. That makes me far more creative. And so we're giving you super practical tools here, which we're challenging you to apply in your life in small situations as well as big ones, and see that they can produce a radical shift in the possibilities and the paths open to you.
And I'd like to add a third category to what you're talking about there. So there's the big things that happen to us. There's the small things that happen to us. And then there are the big things that we have absolutely no impact, that we cannot directly impact, that are happening in the world. There are lots of things that are going on in this moment in history that I cannot tangibly change, but it is just like this slow little energetic leak out of the back of my head all day long. And the other thing I think is really important to recognize is that, like, when we're doing our internal work about something like that, I'm not putting on blinders and ignoring it. I'm not saying it's unimportant. What I'm doing is I'm changing the way I'm responding in the moment because of what is going on, which is going to help me act better in the world and make the choices that I want. But it's also going to have health benefits, it's going to have energy benefits. So I can, when I have opportunities to respond, I'm going to be more well resourced to do that particular thing.
Yeah, so there are all these global events that are going on, and they're always going on. It's not like we're going to come to some kind of ideal space where there are none of these negative things going on, and there's just a constant diet of them that is being served up to us by the media. So it's very easy to get all wrapped up in them and get worried about them. If you can do something to help, by all means do that. You know, if you can donate to Gaza relief, if you can donate to people who are suffering in Darfur, do something practical if that lies within your power. And if it doesn't, then focus on things that you do have power over. So there are these big global events. Are they there? Is it important to be aware of them? It certainly is. But there is a big difference between being aware of them and becoming totally obsessed with them and checking your phone twice a day to see the latest news of the slaughter. You know, that's really not going to help your peace of mind, your productivity, your life. So being aware is one thing. When you are hooked, though, on news, especially negative news, then you are doing yourself a disservice. You're raising your stress level in a situation where you can do nothing about it. If I have an unhealthy habit, my body's suffering, I can change my habit. If something's going on 10,000 miles away, which I can't change, and I'm stressing myself about that, you've just trapped yourself in a box. So I make it my own habit to know about those things. I know those things are happening. In meditation, I hold them in my awareness and I pray for peace. Is it having any effect on the world? I don't know. It's certainly having an effect on my own levels of cortisol and my own biology. And so I focus on what I can do. My most challenging thing, Gene, is when I bring to mind some of the warmongers. I try and remind myself they have a soul. They have a higher purpose. They have a higher power. They have the same human rights as anyone else, even if they are murdering other people. It's very difficult to do that. And so I'll pick some sort of global monster sometimes and just sit there and focus on breathing and recognizing their humanity. Very, very difficult. And the more of a monster they are, the harder it is for me.
Yeah.
But again, that is my personal challenge. Then they're triggering me, and again, I then can use that triggering to learn to reduce my own stress. So again, we whenever we get into a situation where we see the other person as the enemy or irreconcilable, then we make a separation between us. We have to learn to live together on a fragile planet, regardless of our cultural differences, regardless of our resource inequalities. We have to make a difference together, because things like global warming, climate change are affecting every single person on the planet. It's not like you point to someone else and say, oh, your end of the boat is sinking. It is something we're in together. We're all in this together, and there are all these huge problems we have to solve together as human beings. What I predict in chapter 7 of my book, Spiritual Intelligence, is we will. That as spiritual intelligence spreads, and it is spreading by measures like compassion. There are so many signs of more compassion in the world than there were 20 years ago, 40 years ago, 100 years ago. And so the whole last chapter is full of this empirical data on how human beings have, despite all outward appearances, have been becoming more compassionate over the years. And so that compassion then is changing brains on a large scale and making people bigger thinkers and see more possibilities. So now we're seeing more global possibilities than we saw in the 80s or in the 60s. And so we as human beings are gaining access to far more creative potential as a human race than we had even a few years back. And I think that's going to be affecting the whole trajectory of the planet. So again, it's something you're doing for yourself, to calm yourself, to tap, to meditate. And it is a contribution you're making to the change in this huge, big psychosphere, the psychological, the spiritual, the consciousness bubble of the planet is being shifted a tiny bit by those acts of kindness, by your own inner state. And don't underestimate that. One of my favorite quotes is from Margaret Mead, who said, "Never believe that a small group of committed people cannot change the world. It's the only thing that ever has changed the world." So let's be part of that small group of committed people.
Awesome. Well, Dawson, as always, I appreciate your time, your insight, but also just your passion. Like, the thing that I've always appreciated about you every single time we interact is I just know where your heart is coming from, and you lead with that and the work that you do. It's great that we have all this amazing scientific research that helps us to recognize we're on the right path, but like your heart is just as important in all of that work. And so thanks for sharing that with us today.
Totally put our passion behind everything we do. It's also one of the things that catalyzes brain change most quickly. So live your life with passion. We were meant to live that way. And I look at our life trajectory and I realize that we're just so full of joy as children. And our job is to become that joyful as adults, tap away what doesn't serve us, and then let our just pure raw passion for life pour through us into everything we do. So you can live a fantastic life. And the tragedy is if you live small. So again, I want to challenge all of those of you who are sharing this conversation. Ask yourself, how can I release those blocks? How can I tap away those things that limit my joy? And even if they seem to be logical, even if they seem to be things you can't escape, see them as energy issues, tap on them, change the energy, and you'll find that the material world around you begins to change as well. So I'm so glad we've had this conversation. And I know that together we can be those points of light that do, in some small way, change our Earth's big picture.
Awesome. Well, thank you, my friend. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. As you look at the screen right now, you can see a link to the entire playlist of every single conversation for previous 24 hours of tapping. There are over 120 presentations waiting for you. And please consider supporting the amazing work of the Peaceful Heart Network.